The Holden Commodore is an automobile manufactured since 1978 by the Holden subsidiary of General Motors in Australia, and, formerly, in New Zealand. In the mid-1970s, Holden established proposals to replace the long-serving Kingswood nameplate with a smaller, Opel-based model. Opel continued to provide the basis for future generations until the launch of the fourth generation in 2006, which deployed an Australian-developed platform. Initially introduced as a single sedan body style, the range expanded in 1979 to include a station wagon. From 1984, Holden began branding the flagship Commodore model as Holden Calais, with the Commodore Berlina introduced in 1984 gaining independent Holden Berlina nomenclature in 1988. Long-wheelbase Statesman Caprice derivatives and Commodore utility body variants followed in 1990. Starting from 2000, the utility became known officially as the Holden Ute. The foundations for a revived Monaro coupé copyright, four-door Holden Crewman utility, and all-wheel drive Holden Adventra crossover were provided by the now discontinued third-generation architecture. Rivalry has come predominantly from the Ford Falcone Euro, also locally built. Prior to the 1988 onward second-generation Commodore, the Holden was positioned a full class below the full-size Falcon. To a lesser degree, competition has also come from Toyota, and previously Mitsubishi Motors, with their mid-size cars. Between 1989 and 1997, Toyota retailed a Toyota League-Sen version of the second-generation Commodore. With the introduction of Generation 3 in 1997, Holden broadened the Commodore's export plans. Since the late 1990s, Commodores have been sent abroad as the Chevrolet Lumina in the Middle East until 2011 and South Africa until 2012, and as the Chevrolet Amiga in Brazil until 2008, then again in 2010. Vauxhall VX-08 sales began in 2007. Versions have also been previously exported in the mid-1990s to Southeast Asia as the Opel Calais, and to North America from 2007 to 2009 as the Pontiac G8. As of June 2014, the latest Commodore, the VF, is sold in North America as the Chevrolet SS. Holden announced in December 2013 that it will cease production of the Commodore in Australia in 2017. First generation, VB. Introduced in October 1978, the VB Commodore development covered a period with the effects of the 1973 oil crisis still being felt. Hence, when Holden decided to replace the successful full-size HZ Kingswood with a new model line, they designed the new car to be smaller and more fuel-efficient. Originally, Holden looked at developing a new WA Kingswood, however, this project was later dismissed. With no replacement in development, Holden looked towards Opel for providing the foundations of the VB, basing it loosely on the four-cylinder record E-body shell with the front grafted on from the Opel Senator A. This change was necessitated to accommodate the larger Holden 6- and 8-cylinder engines. Holden also adopted the name Commodore from Opel, which had been using the name since 1967. Opel went on to use Holden Euro unregistered trademark S record Senator Hybrid as a foundation for its new generation Commodore C, slotting in between the two donor models. Using GMA Euro unregistered trademark S rear-wheel drive V-body platform is used by the record and Senator, the VB retained 96% of the preceding HZ Kingswood's interior space, despite being 14% smaller in overall dimensions, although 5% larger than the Tirana. With the Commodore dropping a full class below the Kingswood and its Ford Falcon competitor, the smaller Commodore was predictably more fuel efficient. This downsizing was first seen as a major disadvantage for Holden, as they had effectively relinquished the potential of selling Commodores to the fleet and taxi industries. These sales losses were thought to be unrecoverable. However, the 1979 energy crisis saw Australian oil prices rise by 140%, putting substantial strain on the automotive industry to collectively downsize, a change that Holden had already done. During the VBA Euro unregistered trademark S development, Holden realized that when driven at speed over harsh Australian roads, the record would effectively break in half at the firewall. This forced Holden to rework the entire car for local conditions, resulting in only 35% commonality with the Opel. The recorder Euro 1 registered trademark S. McPherson strut front suspension was accordingly modified, and the recirculating ball steering was replaced with a rack and pinion type. These modifications blew development costs beyond expectations to a reported $110 million a figure close to the cost of developing a new model independently. With such a large sum consumed by the VB development program, Holden was left with insufficient finances to resource the development of a wagon variant. Added that the Commodore architecture was considered an unsuitable base for utility and long-wheelbase models, Holden was left with only a sedan, albeit one in 3 levels of luxury, a base, SL, and SLE. Desperate measures forced Holden to shape the Commodore front end to the rear of the record wagon. As the wagon-specific sheet metal had to be imported from Germany, the wagon, introduced in July 1979, suffered from inevitable component differences from the sedan. Although infrequently criticized in the early years, quality problems were evident, with poor trim and panel fit problematic for all first-generation Commodores. This, coupled with mechanical dilemmas such as water pump failure and steering rack rattle, ensured warranty claims were high in the first year. In face of these issues, VB was praised for its value for money and sophistication, especially in regards to the steering, ride quality, handling and brakes, thus securing the Wheels Car of the Year award for 1978. VC. The most significant change to the VC Commodore of March 1980 was the engine upgrading to XT5 specification. Now painted blue and thus known as the Blue Straight Sixes and Holden V8s, these replaced the red units fitted to the VB and earlier cars. Changes included a new 12-port cylinder head, redesigned combustion chambers, inlet and exhaust manifolds, a new 2-barrel carburetor and a Bosch electronic ignition system for the inline sixes. Tweaks and changes to the V8s surrounded the implementation of electronic ignition, revised cylinder head and inlet manifold design and the fitment of a 4-barrel carburetor on the 4.2-liter variant. These changes brought improved efficiency, increased outputs and aided drivability. In response to increasing oil prices, a 4-cylinder variant was spawned in June 1980. Displacing 1.9 liters, this power plant known as Starfire was effectively Holden's existing straight six with 2 cylinders removed. The 4's peak power output of 58 kilowatts and torque rated at 140 Nm meant its performance was compromised. Reports indicate that the need to push the engine hard to extract performance led to real-world fuel consumption similar to the straight sixes. Holden Euro 1 registered trademark S emphasis on fuel economy extended beyond powertrains, with a fuel consumption vacuum gauge replacing the tachometer throughout the range, although this could be optioned back with the sports instrumentation package. Visual changes were limited, the relocation of the corporate crest to the center of the redesigned grille, black-colored trim applied to the tail lamp surrounds on sedans, and the embossment of model badging into the side rubbing strips. The previously undesignated base car was now the Commodore L, opening up the range for a new unbadged sub-level car. This delete option model was despecified and available only to fleet customers. On the premium Commodore SLE, a resurrected shadow tone exterior paint option became available in a limited range of dark over light color combinations. According to contemporary reviews, changes made to the VC steering produced a heavier feel and inclined understeer, while the revised suspension gave a softer ride and addressed concerns raised while riding fully laden. VH. The VH series Commodore introduced in September 1981 brought moderately updated frontal bodywork, with a new bonnet and front guards to facilitate the reshaped headlamps and a horizontally slatted grille. These front-end design changes worked to produce a longer, yet wider look. At the rear, sedans featured redesigned tail light clusters, the design of which borrowed from Mercedes-Benz models of the day, using a louvered design. At the same time, the nomenclature of the range was rationalized. The SL superseded the L as the base model, with the old SL level becoming the mid-range SLX, and the SLE remaining as the top-of-the-line variant. Wagons were restricted to the SL and SLX trims. redesigned pentagonal alloy wheels replacing the original SLE type used since 1978 along with a black painted B-pillar, wraparound chrome rear bumper extensions to the wheel arches, and extended tail lamps that converged with the license plate alcove distinguished the range-topping SLE from other variants. The new pentagonal wheels were initially in short supply, such that only Shadowtone option SLE sedans received them during 1981 production. Mechanical specifications carried over, except for a new 5-speed manual transmission, optional on the 1.9-litre 4-cylinder and 2.85-litre 6-cylinder versions. In an attempt to improve sales figures of the inline-4 engine, Holden spent considerable time improving its performance and efficiency. Modifications were also made to the 2.85-litre 6 to lift economy, and the power plants managed to reduce fuel consumption by as much as 12.5 and 14%, correspondingly. Holden released the sports-oriented Commodore SS sedan in September 1982 reintroducing a nameplate used briefly 10 years prior with the headquarters series. Provisioned with a choice of 4.2 or optional 5.0-litre V8 engines, both versions of the VHSS were teamed with a 4-speed manual transmission. Racing driver Peter Brock's HDT Special Vehicles business produced 3 upgrade versions, known as Group 1, Group 2 and Group 3, the latter version available in either 4.2-litre or more commonly 5.0-litre V8 configuration. By the time of the VH series, Commodore sales were beginning to decline. Holden's 6-cylinder engine, which was carried over from the Kingswood, could trace its roots back to 1963 and was no longer competitive. Continual improvements made to Commodore's Ford Falcon rival meant the VH was not significantly more fuel efficient or better performing despite the smaller size. This was curtailed by the absence of any major powertrain revisions by the time of the VH and the lack of visual departure from the original VB. Holden also had to deal with the influx of their own mid-size Chimera from 1982, which presented comparable interior volume with lower fuel consumption, and for less than the Commodore pricing point. Chimera sales were strong initially, but as fuel prices had stabilized, buyers gravitated away from Chimera and Commodore towards the larger Falcon, which overtook the Commodore as Australia's best-selling car for the first time in 1982. VK. Representing the first major change since the VB original, the VK model of 1984 introduced a 6-window glasshouse, as opposed to the previous 4-window design, to make the Commodore appear larger. The revised design helped stimulate sales, which totaled 135,000 in 2 years. This did not put an end to Holden unregistered trademark's monetary woes. Sales of the initially popular Chimera slumped due to unforeseen quality issues, while the Holden WB series commercial vehicle range and the Statesman WB luxury models were starting to show their age. Their 1971 origins compared unfavorably with Ford unregistered trademark's more modern Falcon and Fairlane models. New names for the trim levels were also introduced, such as Commodore Executive, Commodore Berlina and Calais. The 3.3-litre Blue Straight 6 engine was replaced by the black specification, gaining computer-controlled ignition system on the carburetor versions and optional electronic fuel injection boosting power output to 106 kilowatts. The 5.0-litre V8 engine continued to power high-specification variants, but was shrunk from 5044 cc to 4987 cc in 1985 due to new Group A racing homologation rules. The new unit cut its predecessor's weight by 75 kilograms and models were fitted with an upgraded braking system. As high oil prices became a thing of the past, Holden decided to drop the 2.856 and 4.2-litre V8, while the 1.9-litre 4-cylinder was limited to New Zealand. VL. Marking a high point in terms of sales, the last of the series VL Commodore sold in record numbers, finally managing to outsell the Ford Falcon in the private sector. The 1986 VL represented a substantial makeover of the VK and would be the last of the mid-size Commodores. Designers distanced the Commodore further away from its Opel origins, by smoothing the lines of the outer body and incorporating a subtle tail spoiler. A thorough redesign of the nose saw the Commodore gain sleek, narrow headlamps and a shallower grille, while the Calais specification employed unique partially concealed headlamps. By this stage, Holden Euro unregistered trademark S30, a year-old six-cylinder, was thoroughly outmoded and would have been difficult to re-engineer to comply with pending emission standards and the introduction of unleaded fuel. This led Holden to sign a deal with Nissan to import their B30E engine. This seemed a good idea in 1983 when the Australian dollar was strong. However, by 1986 the once viable prospect became rather expensive. The public quickly accepted what was at first a controversial move, as reports emerged of the improvements in refinement, 33% gain in power and 15% better economy over the carburetor version of the VK's Black Straight 6. An optional turbocharger appeared 6 months later and lifted power output to 150 kilowatts. In October 1986, an unleaded edition of Holden Euro unregistered trademark S-carburetted V8 engine was publicized. Holden had originally planned to discontinue the V8 to spare the engineering expense of converting to unleaded. However, public outcry persuaded them to relent. VLs in New Zealand were also available with a 2.0-litre six-cylinder B20E engine. The VL suffered from some common build quality problems, such as poor windshield sealing, that can lead to water leakages and corrosion. Awkward packaging under the low bonnet coupled with Holden's decision to utilize a cross-flow radiator meant the six-cylinder engine was especially susceptible to cracked cylinder heads, a problem not displayed on the Nissan Skyline with which it shares the B30E engine. The used car safety ratings, published in 2008 by the Monash University Accident Research Center, found that first-generation Commodores provide a worse-than-average level of occupant safety protection in the event of an accident. Second-generation, VN. The VN Commodore of 1988 and subsequent second-generation models took their bodywork from the larger Opel Senator B and new Opel Omega A. However, this time, the floor plan was widened and stretched, now matching the rival Ford Falcon for size. Continuing financial woes at Holden meant the wider VN body was underpinned by narrow, carryover VL chassis components in a bid to save development costs. In the VN and succeeding models, the Commodore Berlina became known simply as the Berlina. The range expanded in 1990 to include a utility variant, given the model designation VG. This was built on a longer wheelbase platform that it shared with the station wagon and luxury VQ Statesman sedans released earlier in the year. During this time, the rival Ford EA Falcon was plagued with initial quality issues which tarnished its reputation. Buyers embraced the VN Commodore, helping Holden to recover and post an operating profit of $157.3 million Australian dollars for 1989. The team at Wheels magazine awarded the VN Car of the Year in 1988, the second Commodore model to receive this award. Changes in the relative values of the Australian dollar and Japanese yen made it financially impractical to continue with the well-regarded Nissan engine of the VL. Instead, Holden manufactured their own 3.8-litre V6 engine based on a Buick design, adapted from front to rear wheel drive. The 5.0-litre V8 remained optional and received a power boost to 165 kilowatts courtesy of multi-point fuel injection. Although not known for its refinement, the new V6 was nevertheless praised for its performance and fuel efficiency at the time. A 2.0-litre Family 2 engine was also offered for some export markets including New Zealand and Singapore, where it was sold as the Holden Berlina. Accompanying the changes to engines, the VL's 4-speed automatic transmission was replaced by the turbo-hydromatic and a Borg-Warner 5-speed manual. A Series 2 update of the VN appeared in September 1989, featuring a revised V6 engine known internally as the EV6. With the update came a power hike of rising to 127 kilowatts from 125 kilowatts. Under an unsuccessful model sharing arrangement as part of the Hawke Labour government reforms in 1989, Toyota began badge engineering versions of the VN Commodore. These disguised Commodores were sold as the Toyota League-Sen, named after Ben League-Sen, the designer of Australia 2 yacht which won the 1983 America's Cup. The original T1 League-Sen offered sedan and station wagon body forms in 3 levels of trim: the base, GL and GLX. These cars were offered with 3.8-litre V6 engine and automatic transmission combination only. VP. The VP update of 1991 featured cosmetic changes and mechanical, however most were not visible unless you were to pull the motor down. And a very similar revised 3.8-litre V6 and 5.0-litre V8 engines from the VN were carried over. The 2.0-litre straight-4 engine previously available in New Zealand was discontinued. Exterior cosmetic changes included a translucent acrylic grille on the base-level Executive and Berlina, with a color-coded grille for the S and SS, and a chrome grille for Calais. Updated tail lights and boot garnishes were also a part of the changes, which were different for each model, with the Berlina having grey stripes and the Calais chrome stripes. Semi-trailing arm independent rear suspension became standard on the Calais and SS, but was made an option on lower-end models in lieu of the live rear axle, improving ride and handling. A new wider front track was introduced to address issues with the previous carried-over VL chassis components. In August 1992, anti-lock brakes were introduced as an option on the Calais and SS trim levels, later becoming optional on all Series 2 variants. This January 1993 update also included a color-coded grille for the Executive and alloy wheels for the Commodore S. Toyota's pattern of updating their League-Sen model tended to follow Commodore rear Euro unregistered trademark S model cycle. The T2 League-Sen from 1991 pioneered new specification designations, XE, VXI and Newport. All future updates, T4 and T5 League-Sens, made use of the new naming system until 1997, when the badge engineering scheme ceased. To give further differentiation to the League-Sen from the Commodore, the League-Sens from the VP model onwards had unique front-end styling treatments. VR. The 1993 VR Commodore represented a major facelift of the second-generation architecture, leaving only the doors and roof untouched. Approximately 80% of car was new in comparison to the preceding model. Exterior changes brought an overall smoother body, semicircular wheel arches and the twin-kidney grille, a Commodore styling trait which remained until the VY model of 2002 and remains a permanent staple on the HSV variants to this day. The rear-end treatment saw raised tail lights, implemented for safety reasons, and a driver's side airbag was introduced as an option, a first for an Australian-built car. Other safety features such as anti-lock brakes and independent rear suspension were only available with the new electronic GM4L60E automatic transmission. Along with a driver's airbag and cruise control, these features were packaged into a new Acclaim specification level, a family-oriented safety spec above the entry-level Executive. Holden's strong focus on safety can be seen in the used car safety ratings. The findings show that in an accident, VNVP Commodores provide a worse-than-average level of occupant protection. However, the updated VR versus models were found to provide a better-than-average level of safety protection. Holden issued a Series 2 revision in September 1994, bringing audible warning chimes for the handbrake and fuel level among other changes. The latest revision of the Buick 3.8-litre V6 engine was fitted to the VR Commodore, featuring rolling element bearings in the valve rocker arms and increased compression ratios. These changes combined to deliver an increase in power to 130 kilowatts and further improvement in noise, vibration, and harshness levels. Wheels magazine awarded the VR Commodore Car of the Year in 1993. Versus. The 1995 Versus Commodore served as a mechanical update of the VR, destined to maintain sales momentum before the arrival of an all-new VT model. The extent of exterior changes amount to little more than a redesigned Holden logo and wheel trims. An overhauled Ecotic version of the Buick V6 engine coincided with changes to the engine in the United States. The Ecotic engine packed 13% more power for a total of 147 kilowatts, cut fuel consumption by 5%, increased the compression ratio from 9.0 to 1 to 9.41 and improved on the engine's previous rough characteristics. Holden mated the new engine with a modified version of the GM4L60E automatic transmission, improving throttle response and smoothing gear changes. The Series 2 update of June 1996 included elliptical side turn signals, interior tweaks and the introduction of a supercharged V6 engine for selected trim levels, and the introduction of a new Getrag manual transmission. The new supercharged engine slotted between the existing V6 and V8 engines in the lineup and was officially rated at 165 kilowatts, just 3 kilowatts below the V8. The Versys Commodore was the last of which to be sold as Toyota League-Sens, as Holden and Toyota ended their model sharing scheme. The last League-Sens were built during 1997. This model was also sold as the Versys Commodore Royale in New Zealand. Similar in specification to the Calais also sold in New Zealand, the Royale featured a standard Versys Commodore body with the front end from the Versys Caprice and an Opel 2.6-litre 54-degree V6 engine. The Royale was also sold between 1995 and 1997 in small numbers to Malaysia and Singapore as the Opel Calais. Third generation, VT. With the VT Commodore of 1997, Holden looked again to Opel in Germany for a donor platform. The proposal was to take the Opel Omega B and broaden the vehicle Euro unregistered trademark S-width and mechanical setup for local conditions. In the early days, Holden considered adopting the Omega as is, save for the engines and transmissions, and even investigated reskinning the existing VR Versys architecture. Later on, the VT bodywork spawned a new generation of Statesman and Caprice, and even went as far as resurrecting the iconic Monaro Coupe copyright of the 1960s and 1970s via a prototype presented at the 1998 Sydney Motor Show. The VT heralded the fitment of semi-trailing arm independent rear suspension as standard across the range, a significant selling point over the rival Falcon, along with increased electronics such as traction control. However, in terms of suspension, the original Opel design was simplified by removing the toe control links that was standard equipment on the European Omega since 1987. Consequently, this afflicted the VT with excessive tire wear due to distortions to the suspension camber angle and toe under heavy load, such as heavy towing or when traveling over undulated surfaces. Notably, Holden's performance arm HSV re-added the toe control link on the flagship GTS 300 model. The 1999 Series 2 update replaced the venerable Holden 5.0-litre V8 engine with a new 5.7-litre Generation 3 V8 sourced from the United States. The V8 was detuned to 220 kilowatts from the original US version, but would receive incremental power upgrades to 250 kilowatts throughout its time in the Commodore, before finally being replaced by the related Generation 4 in the VZ. The supercharged V6 was uprated to 171 kilowatts from the Versys. Safety-wise, side airbags became an option for the acclaimed higher models, a first for Holden. From the onset, parent company General Motors was interested in incorporating a left-hand drive Commodore in its Buick lineup, as manifested by the unveiling of the Buick XP 2000 concept car in 1996. Although this idea was ultimately abandoned, the GM-funded project allowed Holden to enter into a range of left-hand export markets. Thus began the Commodore's rapid expansion into parts of Indochina, the Middle East and South Africa badged as the Chevrolet Lumina and Brazil as the Chevrolet Omega 3.8 V6. In its home market, the VT series was awarded the 1997 Wheels Car of the Year award, the fourth such award in Commodore's history. It found ready acceptance in the market as many buyers steered away from the slow-selling Ford AU Falcon, becoming the best-selling Commodore to date and cementing its place as #1 in Australian sales. The sedan and wagon range comprised Commodore Executive, Commodore Acclaim, Berlina and Calais. Limited editions included a Sydney 2000 Olympic version and Holden 50th anniversary based on better-equipped executive models. VX. The VX update from 2000 featured a revised headlamp design. The VT's rear tail lamp panel was replaced by two separate light assemblies. Conversely, the luxury-oriented Berlina and Calais sedans continued using a full-width boot lid panel incorporating the registration plate and tail lamps. The VX series also formed the first Holden Ute, designated VU. Earlier utility models were instead entitled Commodore Utility. An updated Series 2 was launched in early 2002, featuring revised rear suspension system now equipped with tow control links to address the VT's issues. The VX series also spawned the production version of the relaunched Holden Monaro. An updated Series 2 was launched in early 2002, featuring revised rear suspension system now equipped with tow control links to address the VT's issues. Safety played a substantial role in the development of the VX model. Bosch 5.3 anti-lock brakes were made standard on all variants, a first for an Australian-manufactured car. And traction control was made available on vehicles equipped with manual transmission. Extensive research was undertaken to reduce the effects from a side impact collision through modification of the B-pillars. The risk presented by a side impact collision in a VX fitted with outside airbags is reduced by 50% when compared to a similarly specified VT model. VY. The $250 million Australian dollars VY mid-cycle update of 2002 represented the first major styling shift since the 1997 VT. Designers discarded the rounded front and rear styling of the VT and VX models, adopting more aggressive, angular lines. The same approach was applied to the interior, whereby the curvaceous dashboard design was orphaned in favor of an angular, symmetrical design. Satin chrome plastic now dominated the four-section aid of the center console stack, and high-end models received fold-out cup holders borrowed from fellow GM subsidiary Saab. Leaving Eurovox behind, Holden turned towards German electronics manufacturer Blaupunkt des Source Audio Systems, an arrangement that remains in place today. Engineering-wise, Holden kept the changes low-key. A revised steering system and tweaked suspension tuning were among some of the changes to sharpen handling precision. Further improvements were made to the Generation 3 V8 engine to produce peak power of 235 kilowatts for sports variants. In a bid to recapture the market for low-cost, high-performance cars, Holden created a new SV8 specification level. Based on the entry-level executive, the SV8 inherited the V8 mechanical package from the SS but made do without the luxury appointments and was sold at a correspondingly lower price. Holden also experimented by releasing a limited edition wagon version of its high-performance SS variant, of which only 850 were built. The Series 2 update added a front strut bar as standard to the SS, which was claimed to increase rigidity and hence handling. As became the trend, the update raised V8 power, now up 10 kilowatts. Amendments in the remaining models were confined to new wheels, trims and decals. However, the Calais has taken on a sports luxury persona as opposed to the discreet luxury character seen in previous models. This repositioning in turn affected the Berlina unregistered trademark S standing. The once second-tiered model now became the sole luxury model, only overshadowed by the more expensive Calais. Coinciding with the VY2 models was the first four-door utility model dubbed the Holden Crewman. Crewman unregistered trademark S underpinnings and body structure, while somewhat unique, shared a fair amount in common with the Statesman Caprice, one-tonner and the two-door Ute. Sensing a new potential market, Holden developed an electronically controlled all-wheel drive system for the VY platform dubbed Cross-Track at a cost of $125 million Australian dollars. Unveiled after the Series 2 changes in 2003, the first application of the new system was the Holden Adventra, a raised VY wagon crossover. The system was only available in combination with the V8 and automatic transmission. Holden chose not to spend extra engineering resources on adapting the all-wheel drive system to the V6, due to be replaced in the upcoming VZ model. Unfortunately for Holden, the Adventra fell well short of expected sales, despite modest targets. VZ. The final chapter of the third-generation series was the VZ Commodore. Debuting in 2004 with a new series of V6 engines known as the Alloytech V6, both 175 kilowatts and 190 kilowatts versions of the 3.6-liter engine were offered. These were later upgraded to 180 and 195 kilowatts respectively in the VE model. When compared to the previous Ecotec engines, the Alloy Tech benefits from increased power output, responsiveness and fuel efficiency. The new engines were mated to a new 5-speed 5L40E automatic transmission on the luxury V6 variants, and a new 6-speed Aisin AY6 manual transmission on the 6-cylinder SV6 Sports variant. However, the long-serving 4-speed automatic carried on in other variants, albeit with further tweaks in an attempt to address complaints about refinement. A new 6.0-litre Generation 4 V8 engine was added to the range in January 2006 to comply with Euro 3 emission standards. Compared to the American version, both active fuel management and variable valve timing were removed. The Alloy-Tech V6 was also affected by the new standards, which saw the peak output reduced to 172 kilowatts. Along with the new powertrain, Holden also introduced new safety features such as electronic stability control and brake assist. The used car safety ratings evaluation found that VTVX Commodores provide a better-than-average level of occupant protection in the event of an accident, with VYVZ models uprated to significantly better than average. Interestingly, ANCAP crash test results rate the 4th-generation VE lower in the offset frontal impact test than the 3rd-generation VYVZ Commodore. The overall crash score was marginally higher than the outgoing model due to improved side impact protection. 4th-generation, VE. Launched in 2006 after GM's 2003 abandonment of their last European rear-drive sedan, the Opel Omega. The VE is the first Commodore model designed entirely in Australia, as opposed to being based on an adapted Opel-sourced platform. Given this and high public expectations of quality, the budget in developing the car reportedly exceeded $1 billion Australian dollars. Underpinned by the new Holden-developed GM Zeta platform, the VE features more sophisticated independent suspension all-round and near-even 50-50 weight distribution, leading to improved handling. Engines and transmissions are largely carried over from the previous VZ model. However, a new 6-speed GM6L80E automatic transmission was introduced for V8 variants, replacing the old 4-speed automatic now relegated to base models. The design of this new model included innovative features to help minimize export costs, such as a symmetrical center console that houses a flush-fitting handbrake lever to facilitate its conversion to left-hand drive. Internationally, the Commodore is again badge-engineered as the Chevrolet Lumina and Chevrolet Omega, along with its new export market in the United States as the Pontiac G8. Variants by Holden's performance arm, HSV, were released soon after the sedan's debut, followed by the long-wheelbase Statesman Caprice models. The VE Ute did not enter production until 2007 whilst the Sportwagen began production in July 2008. Since its release, the VE has been awarded Wheels Car of the Year, being the 5th Commodore model to do so. In late 2008 Holden made changes to the VE Commodore, including the addition of a passenger seatbelt reminder system. The rollout of such modifications allowed the VE range to be upgraded in stages to the 5-star ANCAP safety rating during 2008 and 2009. The September 2009 MY10 update to the VE Commodore platform introduces a new standard engine, the Euro a 3.0-litre spark ignition direct injection V6 on the Omega and Berlina, with a 3.6-litre version of the same reserved for all other V6 variants. The standard transmission is now a 6-speed GM6L50 automatic, replacing the 4-speed in Omega and Berlina models and the 5-speed in higher luxury levels. A 6-speed manual is still available in sport models. Holden claims the new powertrains will provide better fuel economy than some smaller 4-cylinder cars. The 3.0-litre version is rated at 9.3 L/100 km. However, economy tests performed by various motoring organizations have yielded varying results. In mid-2010 Holden released the VE Series 2. The major difference saw the introduction of the Holden IQ system, a center-mounted LCD display that provides navigation, Bluetooth, and controls to the stereo. There were also small alterations to the styling and other minor changes. VF. The VF Commodore, a major overhaul of the VE, was officially revealed on February 10, 2013. The GM Zeta platform, the body shell, suspension and electrics have been thoroughly reworked to reduce weight, improving handling and fuel efficiency. Changes to the model lineup see the deletion of the Berlina nameplate, which combined with the standard Calais variant, represented the smallest model share of sales in the lineup, while the base model was renamed from the Omega to become the Evoque. The standard features list shows front and rear parking sensors, reverse camera and auto park assist on all models in the range, and high-spec models such as the Calais V and SSV readline models pick up forward and reverse collision alert and a color heads-up display as standard features. Recommended retail pricing has been reduced across the range, with Calais V V8 and SSV readline dropping $10,000 off the recommended retail price. In 2012 it was announced that the new VF Commodore would be exported to the United States as the Chevrolet SS for the 2014 model year. The VF Commodore-based SS sedan is also used in NASCAR, replacing the Chevrolet Impala. In February 2013, a week after the VF Commodore made its debut in Sydney, the SS made its debut in Daytona, Florida during the Daytona 500. Holden announced in December 2013 that it will cease production of the Commodore in Australia in 2017. One possibility is for it to be replaced by a Gram vehicle built in China for the Chinese market. Chevrolet Lumina. Since 1998, the Holden Commodore has been sold as the Chevrolet Lumina in the Middle East and South Africa, and previously in Southeast Asia. A coupé version based on the Holden Monaro was also sold in the Middle East as the Chevrolet Lumina Coupé. In Arabia, the Lumina was offered in 4 different trims: LS, LTZ, S and SS. The LTZ and S comes standard with a 3.6L Alloytech V6 and a 6-speed automatic transmission for the S and 4-speed for the LTZ, while the SS comes standard with 6.0L Alloytech V8 with the option of active fuel management. A 6-speed manual is standard with the option of a 6-speed automatic on SS. The LTZ was the luxury model, while the S and SS models focused on sportiness. Exports to the Middle East ceased in 2011. Lumina models sold in South Africa received updates for the 2011 model year. These changes were introduced to coincide with the release of the VE Series 2 Commodore. Changes include revised bumpers, these is a chrome molding above the number plate on the boot lid, refreshed alloy wheel designs and the Holden IQ system. Also the SSV model was introduced. The Holden Ute is sold as the Lumina Ute in South Africa. Sales. References. Bibliography. External links. Official websites for Australia, New Zealand, US, Holden model history, Holden Commodore at Unique Cars and Parts, the unofficial Holden Commodore archive,